God planted the garden, in other words, the man Adam's soul, and also Eve's soul, He gave them an order, and He said, "You shall not eat of the tree which is in the midst, called the tree of knowledge of good and evil." We now know that that tree is the flesh tree. Adam and Eve were not to partake of the flesh. Even though they were in flesh, they were not to be ruled by flesh. They were to be ruled by the Spirit, by the tree of life. In fact, God said, "In the very day that you eat of this tree, you shall die." Satan, being very clever, convinced woman that she would not die. In fact, he says, "Did God really say that you're going to die in the day that you eat of it?" And she says, "Yes, in the day that we eat of it, we shall surely die." And he says, "You will not surely die." And he convinces her to eat of it because the tree looked good for food. And she ate of it. And she never died. She didn't die that day. So what gives? Did God lie? No. Because God is not a man that He should lie. Something died that day. What was that? It was the very Spirit of God that He blew into their nostrils. He imparted to them the Spirit called the Word. That tree of life, that day, died. He withdrew it. So, if you look at it from a fleshly point of view, God was a liar and Satan was not. But if you understand what the garden is, and if you understand what the tree of life is, and that it's the Spirit that gives life, and a soul with the Spirit of God is considered alive, then you clearly understand that after that day, when God withdrew His Spirit, they were not considered alive anymore. They lost their spirit because they partook of the flesh. That is the temptation. Satan, who was awarded the kingship or the rulership over flesh, conceived a clever plan to get them to be slave to him, because he's the king of the flesh. And the only way you could do that is by convincing them to partake of the flesh. So just to recap, the man Adam's soul and even Eve's soul was the garden, and the tree in the midst was the flesh, that fleshly nature. The tree of life was the Spirit of God. Satan convinced them to partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So they became fleshly. They became ruled by their fleshly thoughts. In that day, they died a spiritual death. And God withdrew His Spirit. And they were not considered living souls anymore. They lost their souls. It took 4,000 years of walking in religion and doing laws for righteousness for them to realize that they have no spirit. Only when Jesus came again and died on a cross could we partake of that spirit again. We were without spirit for 4,000 years. This is why Jesus said to the disciple, "Let the dead bury the dead." People just could not fathom what He was saying. In fact, one of the top teachers of Israel at that time, a man called Nicodemus, came to Jesus and he said, "Look, we know that you're a rabbi. We know that you are sent from God." And Jesus says to him, "Look, Nicodemus, nobody can enter the kingdom of God except if they are born again." And he just couldn't understand it. He says, "Lord, how can I go back into my mother's womb? I cannot be born a second time." But in fact, Jesus was talking about the Spirit. They never had spirit. They needed to be born again in spirit. And it took His death on the cross that if we believe, we receive His Spirit. And when we receive of that Spirit, we receive once again the tree of life. And we become living souls. We have the privilege to have the God of everything, the Creator of all, to come and indwell us. We receive of that tree of life. It is now our duty just to partake of that tree and to eat of that fruit.